Now is the time, now is the best time, now is the best time of your life. Life is a crime.
Welcome friends to Ye Old Entertainment. Today I am starting a new series of videos that I'm calling Now is the Time. I figured with all these early access periods, day one patches, hot fixes, updates, free-to-play DLCs, paid DLCs, deluxe editions that include everything, Steam sales, GOG sales.
I can't take it anymore!
Good video game deals everywhere.
It's hard to tell what the best time is to finally fetch that game that you have been putting off for months or even years. And who knows, maybe you have already played a game and you are just looking for the best opportunity to give it another spin. Well, worry ye not, because Alex is here to point you in the right direction. And I'm starting with a game that you should absolutely get. I'm talking about Icewind Dale II, a game that I have already talked about here on the channel. Icewind Dale II was one of the few games that I skipped back in the glory days of the Infinity Engine, because I wasn't impressed with the first game in the series. So a few years ago, when I was making the Road to Baldur's Gate 3 series, I decided to give it my first spin. And it's been one of the best decisions I've taken since I've had the channel. Icewind Dale 2 made me go full old man mode.
So, standard mode.
Yeah, well, it made me say, they don't make them like they used to. So much so, in fact, that I wanted to play the game again immediately after I saw the credits roll. But I had to put it off because I was too busy doing the Road to Baldur's Gate 3 series, which you can also watch here on the channel, link in the description section of this video. But I've been given the perfect excuse to play it again. There is an enhanced edition mod that you can download and install right now. I'll also leave a link to it in the description section of this video. And before you get your panties in a bunch, no, this was not made by Beamdog. The link is available in a Beamdog forum, but it was made by a group of knowledgeable, passionate, and very hardworking fans. You can't get it for free, and you can't install it on your current version of Icewind Dale 2. If you don't have such a thing as a current version of Icewind Dale 2, you can always get one for $9.99 on Good Old Games. $10 for one of the best games ever made. More than 50 hours of immersive settings and peak D&D combat, and decent storytelling and humor. It's basically everything we liked about both D&D games and the Infinity Engine back in the day. Know this though, the complete version that you can find on Good Old Games does not include the Enhanced Edition mod. This is a fan-made mod that you have to download, install, and customize. But it's super easy.
Barely an inconvenience.
And just in case, because one of you guys asked, I made a little tutorial on how to install the mod. I also added a few comments on some of the components that you might find useful. You'll find this tutorial in the description section of this video as well. It's important to mention that the Enhanced Edition mod has a series of components that you can install and customize individually. This means that you can choose which of these features you want and which ones you want to give the good old Skipperooski to. I wish I could have done that with Beamdog's enhanced editions of Baldur's Gate and Icewind Dale, but that's neither here nor there. So for this video, whenever there is an enhanced edition component that's worth mentioning, we will talk about how it changes the game so that you can decide whether you want to install it or not. The mod does come with a README file that explains how the various components work and how compatible it is with other mods and with stuff like the Collector's Edition bonus items. So I very emphatically recommend that you check out the README file that comes with the mod. As some of you know, I review games using a system of categories that I believe to be relevant to the genre of the game at hand. And the game at hand this time is Icewind Dale 2 with the Enhanced Edition mod. It is, of course, a CRPG that takes place in the universe of Dungeons & Dragons, it features real-time with pause combat, and it uses the 3rd edition ruleset of D&D. And when it comes to those, character creation and character progression is where our epic journey begins. They say you can't improve upon perfection. Well, turns out you can. Icewind Dale 2 has one of the best character creation and progression systems of all time in my opinion. And I'm not even a huge fan of the D&D way of things. I still can't decide if I like more the Temple of Elemental Evil's character creation and progression system or Icewind Dale 2's though. Icewind Dale 2 uses the 3rd edition D&D ruleset, and the Enhanced Edition mod throws in a couple of nice little tweaks and improvements. And we are going to talk about those, but let's start from scratch. Icewind Dale 2 lets you create your entire party of adventurers from the get-go. And it's a proper party of 6, not 5, 4, or 3. You can also create one hero and roll it Han Solo for the entire game if you wish. But what's interesting to me about the Enhanced Edition mod is that you now have a bunch of recruitable companions. So you can create any number of party members and then fill the remaining spots with the people you meet along the way. However, you cannot recruit companions if you don't have any spots available, and you can't momentarily dismiss them and have them sit around somewhere waiting for you to choose them for this, that, or the other adventure, like you could in Baldur's Gate 2. And I think this is good, because it gives you an additional incentive to play the game again and recruit different companions, though I know many of you aren't going to be thrilled with this. I, for example, created 3 characters for my last playthrough: a dwarf fighter, a halfling rogue, and a half-elf druid. And I then recruited Rake Redwaters, Vera, and Emma Moonblade. But there are many other NPCs that you can't recruit, like Black Joffrey, Vreg the Vileclaw, Sack Boozemberry, which is a rogue/illusionist character, the Abishai Shan, Pairi, who is a sorcerer, and Sursa, that noob monk who needs training at the Black Raven Monastery. If you don't want to create an entire party, and you also don't want to recruit anyone, you can always choose one of the many pre-made parties the game has to offer. I wouldn't normally even consider this option, but these parties are oh so freaking good. They are all very well balanced, and they all have super cool background stories, the kind of stuff that gets your role-playing juices flowing. Take the description, for example, of the party named the Annals of Haldren. This werry band has sprouted up in the shadow of Haldren Death's Head, a dwarf from the Ruingor clan in the Sunset Mountains, a mountain range far to the south of Icewind Dale. Their leader, Haldren, seeks enough wealth so that he may erase the stain of his family name from the bloody crimes of one of his ancestors, a vicious dwarf known as Caervas. The troop gathered in Luskan barely a 10-day ago. Neither evil nor specially law-abiding, the group tends to honor their word and stick to their cause, which is furthering their own name and erase the stain from Haldren's. And then you have an equally juicy description for each party member. I strongly recommend that you read them even if you're not interested in choosing a pre-made party. You can also edit these pre-made parties. You can remove some of its OG members and create your own characters to replace them. Or you can leave the spots empty so that you can recruit some NPCs later on. You can of course create each individual character, and you have a slew of options at your disposal. You start by choosing a gender for your character, not body type or pronouns or any of that nonsense, and then you choose a portrait which is wired to the gender. Again, no nonsense here. And I think that Icewind Dale II has some of the best portraits out there. But if you don't like them, or if you want to use your own portrait, you can click on the customize button and choose a custom-made full body image and an avatar if you wish. And because the Enhanced Edition has a pretty neat HD resolution feature, not compatible with a high-res patch that's been out there for a while, just so you know, your custom portraits finally look the way they are meant to. Look at this no bullshit badass dwarf that I have as my party leader. The Enhanced Edition includes race revisions. This optional component revises various races and sub-races and gives them abilities that they're supposed to have in pen and paper. For example, knockdown or trip attempts made against dwarves have their DC reduced by 4, as dwarves are specially stable. Dwarves also start proficient with axes and hammers, as it should be. Humans get 4 extra skill points at their first level instead of 2. Elves can detect traps even when you don't activate the search function, and gnomes...
A gnome? What manner of tomfoolery is this?
Yes, Spades, sometimes it's worth taking a gnome along for the ride. Well, they have bonus to the difficulty class of illusion spells, so if you want to go down that road with your magic user, there is that. The README file included with the mod tells you about all the modifications you can expect for every race if you choose to install the revised race component. You have 7 races to choose from, and some of them have sub-races. Humans, for example, can be Aasimar, Tieflings, or regular humans, and they all come with a brief description about what defines them as races, as well as a list of their advantages and disadvantages. Be mindful though, because sub-races are different from each other, and some sub-races are better suited to some classes than others. Then you get to choose your class. There are 11 delicious classes to choose from in Icewind Dale II, and the Enhanced Edition mod has a class revision component. Again, remember that all of these components are optional. Barbarian Rage, for example, now grants immunity to fear, hopelessness, stun, paralysis, sleep, and unconsciousness. Also, Barbarians start gaining damage resistance at level 2 rather than 11. Barbarians' damage resistance is also doubled if they are wearing medium armor.
I've got just the thing. The breastplate of Argon.
What the f***? Oh, damn, Brett, I guess you'll have to wear that.
Which is to say, hide armor or chainmail. Also, Barbarian Rage now keeps improving after level 20, though it is highly unlikely that you'll ever get there. I'm not a huge fan of the Bard class, but those of you who are in for an absolute treat. Bard songs now scale with levels, and if you have more than one Bard in your party, their songs can stack. And it's not like these improvements are detached from the rest of the game. There's the level 3 Songs of Codis, which makes all allies immune to harmful sound-based spell and abilities, which is especially useful now because if you install the creature revision component that comes with the enhanced mod, enemies like harpy whales in Chapter 1 use more sound-based abilities, which makes Songs of Codis a heck of a lot more useful. Druids have a new set of shape-shifting forms, and their abilities scale with their level. And they also have feats that allow them to shape-shift into blink dogs, rhinoceros beetles, and a swarm of insects that works like the creeping doom spell. And I like that some of these shapes can make them insanely OP against some enemies and pathetically weak against some others. I almost soloed the entire area outside the enemy fortress in Chapter 1 with my druid shapeshifted as a creeper beetle, because most enemies had non-magic, non-elemental attacks, and as it turns out, it's really hard to hit a swarm of creeper beetles with arrows and maces. Rogues get +1 luck every 5 levels, and in Icewind Dale 2, luck increases the chance of a critical hit, so sneak attacks are much better with the Enhanced Edition. Pair this up with a new Opportunist feat, and you have a lean, mean damage machine that can make quick work of many types of enemies. Monk and Paladin orders no longer restrict multi-classing, and they have extra abilities, but I have not used these classes yet, so I strongly recommend you check out the documentation that comes with the mod to see if any of these new changes and abilities appeal to you. And just in case it needs to be said, you can multi-class to your heart's content in Icewind Dale 2. There are alignment restrictions, of course, and you have to take into account that a multi-class character gets all the class features of all of his or her classes, but also suffers the consequences of the special restrictions of all of his or her classes. And that's the way it should be. Remember the equivalent exchange principle? And know that I am just telling you about the changes that the Enhanced Edition mod has brought to Icewind Dale 2 that I know about. There are many more revisions to other classes and orders, so again, I strongly encourage you to look into those. In Icewind Dale 2, some classes have some form of subclass. Wizards, for example, have access to different schools of magic, while monks, paladins, and clerics have orders. After you choose your class and your subclass, if applicable, you then go on to choose an alignment. Your alignment will determine how your character will or should react given the situation. For example, almost at the end of Chapter 3, you meet this band of slavers. If you are neutral or evil, you can talk to these guys, trade with them, get the tools you need to clear the stone barricade that keeps you from going further east, and be on your way. But if you have a good character in your party, like Emma Moonblade, she will say, "Nah, no fucking way," and you'll be left with no choice but to fight these guys. Also, some classes and orders restrict your initial choice of alignment, and if, over the course of the game, you stray away from your class and subclass's permitted alignment, you may end up suffering dire consequences. But the Enhanced Edition mod also features a looser alignment restriction for classes component that you can install if you find your class's alignments to be too restrictive. If you install this component, Paladins of Ilmater and Mystra can be neutral good now, and Paladins of Helm can be lawful neutral, for example. I can see some people saying, "This is bullshit." Well, then don't install the component, problem solved. Next comes the ability section of the character creation screen. Here you allocate points to your character's attributes. Icewind Dale 2's core system grants you a pool of points that you can allocate to the various skills in the game. The Enhanced Edition mod, however, lets you change that system to Baldur's Gate's traditional roll-reroll system, or to the Temple of Elemental Evil system, in which you roll as many dice as attributes there are in the game and assign each of them to the attribute of your choice, or to Neverwinter Nights system, so there is no way you're not going to be happy with the game's stat allocation system. Then it's time to choose your skills. Skills determine your character's ability to deal with various combat and non-combat situations. Bluff, diplomacy, and intimidate, for example, can be really useful to get people to give you certain information and to avoid or delay certain combat encounters. And skills like search and disable device can make your life a lot easier in places where there are many traps. And because these skills are only as useful as the opportunities you get to use them, the Enhanced Edition mod has added several new persuasion options and situations, and some of them are very impressive. You can now avoid some major fights and skip some areas altogether if you have a high enough level of skills like diplomacy, bluff, intimidate, lore wilderness, etc.
Massive spoilers coming your way.
For example, you can now successfully request an audience with Isser and Mede at the entrance of the Severed Hand, which lets you basically skip the entire chapter. This right here, in my opinion, is the most exciting reason to give Icewind Dale II another spin with this mod. Then come the feats. The feats. As you know, feats in D&D allow you to tweak your characters to make them more efficient at the role they are supposed to play in the party. It can make those fighters who are meant to be the tank of the lot more resilient and more efficient at funneling damage onto themselves. It can make rogues who specialized in ranged combat more precise and suffer lesser penalties when they are attacking enemies who are engaged in melee skirmishes with your allies. It can make frontline magic users resist interruptions more easily, etc. There were already plenty of those in Icewind Dale II, and many of them were deliciously class specific, which I very much like. But the Enhanced Edition mod adds 36 new feats, and it modifies many others. You have feats like Shield Focus, which grants you extra AC when using shields, which is a passive benefit. But you also get active feats like Knockdown, which lets your fighter knock down enemies unless they pass a strength skill check. This feat may be taken twice, and if you take it a second time, you'll be able to knock down or trip even larger creatures, with an added bonus of +2 to the difficulty check. This skill is fantastic to knock down magic users on their asses before a fight starts to prevent them from casting their protective spells and just swarm them to death with attacks before they recover. Save Spell allows you to use an AoE spell without the risk of hitting your own party members at the expense of making the spell you want to use it on take up a spell slot one level higher. Rapid Reload, for example, lets you take 2 shots with your crossbow per turn instead of 1. An Opportunist lets your character make an extra attack of opportunity every time an ally lands an attack on the same enemy. Rogues become lethal with this shit, I tell you. Especially if you have Rhaeg in your party, who can be very extremely accurate with his attacks. There are different types of magic users in the game, and when I say different, I mean different. Clerics, wizards, druids, paladins, rangers, and sorcerers are all capable of casting spells, but each of their magical talents serves a different purpose in the game, because these classes are meant to fulfill different roles. These magic users also come by their spells in different ways. Wizards learn them from books, while druids and clerics learn them automatically when they reach the spell's level. When magic users level up, they get more uses for spells. Spells have tiers in Icewind Dale II, and as magic users level up, they gain new uses for new spells. In order to be able to use the spells they learn, magic users have to add these spells to their spell books. There is a limited number of spells that magic users can use per spell tier, so you can spread your uses across multiple spells, or you can give multiple uses to those spells you find most useful. These Treants, for example, are tough motherfuckers and they are immune to cold, acid, and other types of damage, but they succumb easily to lightning. So you might want to take a rest before you fight them and have your wizard and druid ditch every non-lightning spell in their spellbook in favor of more uses for their lightning-based spells. The Enhanced Edition adds over 90 new spells. These include unused spells like Dimension Door, pen and paper spells that weren't included in the original game like Fly, Wall of Force, and Reverse Gravity, which is absolutely glorious to use. Spells from other games like Mantle, Stygian Ice Storm, and Ice Axe Greater Missile Storm, as well as unusual ones like Identify Creature, which is a divination spell that lets you see the stats of the target creature, and Aurel's Blessing, which increases the power of your cold spells if you want to go for a cold damage specialist. Some of the new spells are Bard only, Paladin only, or Ranger only, which is a good thing. Cleric domains have better spell choices, Emma Moonblade, for example, can cast Moonblade and Wall of Moonlight as a domain spell at a lower level than other clerics, which is absolutely fantastic. And again, I am only telling you about how some of the spells and feats work. You would need to play this game for a decade to get a full grasp of the usefulness of the game's entire spectrum of builds. After you're done choosing your character's feats, if you're rolling a wizard, a cleric, a druid, or a sorcerer, you also get to choose some initial spells, and if you're a cleric, you also get to choose some domain spells, which depend on your character's deity of choice. Then you choose your appearance, and look at those choices. Man, we've definitely gotten more frivolous and superficial over the course of the years. In the old days, people would spend 95% of their time choosing their feats, spells, and skills. Nowadays, they spend 95% of their time tuning their appearance. But that's it, you are all set with your character or your party of 2, 3, 6, or however many you wish. The Enhanced Edition mod has the better XP progression component, which lets you choose if you want enemies' challenge rating to be always equal to their level, or if you want enemies' challenge rating to be slightly less than their level. In RPGs, gear is also a very important aspect of the character's build. Icewind Dale II wasn't particularly awesome in this department. Powerful items were scarce and they weren't awfully build relevant. The Enhanced Edition adds a ton of items, and many of them work in beautiful synergy with other aspects of your character's build. You just have to go to the weapon shop in Targos and take a look at the stock there. You are in for an amazing surprise that's surely going to bring a huge smile to your face. I want to spoil it so bad, but I won't this time. Just go there and check what's on offer. Also, new item descriptions are deliciously well written and lore consistent, and they add a great deal to the immersion aspect of the game. I already loved Icewind Dale II's character creation and progression system as it was, and it only got better with the Enhanced Edition mod. This mod improves upon every aspect of the character's progression, and the components that modify the gameplay aspect of the game also serve to put all of these various new options to the test. There are more choices, more trade-offs, more opportunities for each of your party members to shine. It's simply
amazing.
I've barely finished the game and I already want to play it again. So if I could give this aspect of the game a 20 out of 10, I absolutely would. Gameplay. Icewind Dale II is an isometric CRPG D&D game that was developed by Black Isle Studios in the year 2002 using the Infinity Engine. That should tell you all you need to know. The gameplay consists of combat, questing, combat, puzzle solving, combat, a bit of exploration, and combat.
Hooray! More fighting! Wow.
Well shit, then combat better be good, right? Well, yes. This game has more memorable fights on it than all the other games I've played this year combined. But it also has its fair share of frustrating moments and passages, and we'll get to that soon enough. Combat in Icewind Dale II uses the real-time with pause system. Do consider that this game was made in a time when you didn't have some of the quality of life features that you see in some of the more recent CRPGs that have been made with the Unity engine, for example. Like that little casting time / action counter above each character's head that you have in Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, or the AoE preview area that you get in all isometric CRPGs these days. But that's how it was back in the day, and if you are new to the genre, and you pick up Icewind Dale II as some sort of retro experience, you will have to come to terms with this. That aside, Icewind Dale II is amongst my favorite D&D themed isometric CRPGs when it comes to combat, along with the Temple of Elemental Evil. In addition to the broad array of options that you have to build your party and each of your characters, there is a wide variety of enemies that have different types of attacks, weaknesses, and immunities. But more importantly, they employ different tactics. Knowing beforehand the enemies that you're about to encounter, as well as each enemy's strengths and weaknesses, is of course a huge advantage. This has always been the case in D&D games. But if you don't rightly know these things, you can still employ sensible tactics, figure out the enemy's advantages and disadvantages over the course of the fight, and emerge victorious. The game rewards you for reading each combat situation and figuring out when you need to tank and spank, flank, kite, lure enemies to a choke point, etc. And better yet, the best tactic for each fight depends on your party's composition. And I love games in which this is the case. In this fight, for example, if you don't kill Beast Lord Harsham as soon as possible, he'll start summoning very powerful adds. So for this fight, it pays to focus fire on him and forget about almost anything else. Same with Buvai in the final fight against Iseren Made. In this area, enemies will constantly spawn around you, so it's a good idea to find a place to hole up and funnel enemies into a choke point. Same thing here, because these spider creatures will spawn behind you, even if you have cleared the entire area of enemies up until that point. Kiting this giant Remorhaz away from its vantage point is the way to go for this fight, because if you don't, immediately after you defeat it, you are going to have to face another boss-like enemy. And I can see a lot of people shaking their heads and saying, "Nuh-uh, for this enemy you want to use such and such spell and be done with it." And that's the beauty of this game. It's this dynamic problem-solving challenge what makes CRPGs shine. Your tactics are just as viable as mine, and the game does not funnel you into doing things the one way you are supposed to. But you need to be sensible about your tactics because of course not everything works. In Icewind Dale II there are various situations that are purposefully designed for you to figure out, like these groups of enemies that have drums that they can beat to call upon reinforcements. This drum, for example, is way behind enemy lines, so getting to it can be a real pain in the ass. But if you walk on the other side of the chasm and you have your druid summon some pets, you can destroy the drum before the enemies even know they are there. And the enhanced edition makes all of this even better. I used the tactic that I just described during my first playthrough to deal with this drum, but because you can recruit Vera, who is permanently incorporeal, you can fly across the chasm, destroy the drum, and then fly back. Speaking of Vera, you can't imagine how much more efficient luring and kiting tactics are with this character because of her permanent incorporeal state. There were entire areas in the game that I overcame by pulling enemies away from the group and teasing them by having Vera going in and out of a room by going through its walls. It was crazy efficient and crazy fun too. You guys have to try this. There are also several components in the Enhanced Edition mod that let you tweak the combat experience. You can add more scrolls to the game. There's a revised creature resistances and immunities component. There's a more accurate saving throws for enemies component. A revised critical hit immunity component that lets you choose between making all creatures vulnerable to critical hits or letting undead constructs, objects, elemental, and oozes become immune to crits. You also have a better racial enemies for rangers component, but I haven't tried this one, so I wouldn't know how it works. And because you now have more persuasion options and more ways to navigate some of the game's locations, you can circumvent some fights and skip entire areas if you wish. Like we said, if you have a character with really high bluff skill, you can successfully request an audience with Iseren Mede at the entrance of the Severed Hand, which lets you fast forward to the final fight. Exploration is not this series' strong suit. There are a couple of non-mandatory rooms that you can wander off to, and a couple of alternative paths within an area that lead to the same location. In this respect, I think the Temple of Elemental Evil was much more interesting with all its secret passageways and shortcuts. But the Enhanced Edition also fixes this with the add additional ways to progress through certain areas component. This component includes several changes that make certain areas more non-linear and add more opportunities to use certain niche spells and skills. If you want to try attacking the Horde Fortress head-on, you can bash open the gate to the inner fortress with a knock spell. While inside, one of the enemies drops a ward stone that will open the gate to Guthma's cabin, though you could also sneak by opening a grate on the roof. Not recommended though, I did this and greatly regretted it. With a ward stone, you can also head into Goblin Warrens from the opposite direction you normally would, and fight your way through and come out the other side. Several locks in the Ice Temple that previously required keys or the lightning machine to open can be picked, and if you have Vera with you, you can't simply walk through their walls and do your thing. Now it's actually possible to fight Aging Killinsart. Taunting it off the altar will begin the fight, though you can still skip the fight by banishing it with its true name. Fighting and defeating it is better though, because it allows you to complete the quest with some additional rewards. This content requires creature revisions to be installed though. In the Severed Hand, the door to the bridge between the War Tower and the Wizard Tower is unlocked from the start. So if you have a way to make the party fly or teleport over the other side of the bridge, you can reach Auric earlier in the game. You also don't need to get Pudu's key to access the 4th floor in the War Tower. If you can make all your party members incorporeal, you can just pass through the gates and trigger the fight, which may potentially shorten the act quite significantly. Riki no longer requires you to fight Yaktu Shim or make a deal with him to proceed to the final bosses. However, if you didn't defeat Yaktu Shim, or if you ally with him, you will have to survive the unkillable Glabresus while fighting the final bosses. And the boss will be tougher in the second phase because you didn't purify the Radiant Pool. So as you can see, the Enhanced Edition injects a bit of emergent gameplay and player agency to a title that was remarkably linear and very extremely combat focused. Questing is simple and straightforward. None of the things you have to do in Icewind Dale II feels like a time-wasting secondary quest or filler material. Everything you do feels important, useful, and oftentimes even funny.
Massive spoilers coming your way.
This game starts firing on all cylinders from the very get-go. As soon as you get off the boat, you have to fend off a goblin invasion and find out where they are coming from. Not long after that, you have to figure out why there's a spirit haunting the local inn. And depending on how you handle the situation, you might even end up recruiting a new companion. The next thing you know is that you're desperately fighting for the survival of Targos alongside the city's militia. And when you're done, you're barely able to catch your breath when the local lord asks you to infiltrate the enemy's stronghold and stop the threat altogether. On the way there, you have to rescue an entire village and root out the local orc lieutenant and save the scouts that were sent by Lord Ulbrek to investigate a 10-day before. And when you go back to Targos with the news that Guthma, the orc leading the invaders, is just a pawn working for a much greater villain, Lord Ulbrek immediately asks you to look into the matter. So you board Oswald Fiddlebender's dubious flying contraption and promptly get taken down by a storm conjured up by druids who are in league with a bad guy. So you find yourself in a situation in which the only way out is forward.
Boy, that escalated quickly. I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
Yeah man, and that's just the initial stretch of the game. With the Enhanced Edition mod, itemization is an important part of the game now. Many of the best items in the game not only offer bonuses to your stats and difficulty checks, but they also have additional effects that change the way you play the game completely. Take for example Knave's Robe. This item has sneak casting, which means that the wearer can sneak attack with spells. When the wearer hits a creature from behind with a damaging spell, it will deal additional damage equal to the wearer's sneak attack damage. So if you're rolling a Thief Wizard, I don't think I need to tell you how powerful this thing is. Staff of Corrosion, for example, has a special skill that adds 5 additional points of damage to acid spells. And for spells that deal acid damage multiple times, this damage is added each time. And these are just two amongst many examples. Icewind Dale II also integrates puzzle solving into the gameplay seamlessly. There is, for example, this fight that requires you to go to a certain place and do a certain something in order to be able to harm the boss. And in order to know this, you must have explored the area thoroughly and read through in-game text, conversations, and tooltips. And when you finally beat the boss with the knowledge you've collected from your exploration endeavors and your puzzle-solving capabilities, in addition to the actions you take during the encounter itself, you feel like you've earned your victory. Some of the puzzles do feel a little bit random and like a little bit of an afterthought, like, why would anyone put these rocks in this particular order here to prevent people from going further? Also, the fact that these floating portals are visually located on islands that you cannot get to, but you can still click on, is peak bad design. I also feel like in some areas the game goes a little bit overboard with the combat. I know battles of attrition are an important part of the D&D experience, but some areas genuinely made me say, God, how many more of these guys? Also, because in many areas enemies spawn out of the blue, it's difficult to correctly assess how many spells and additional resources you are going to need before the fight is over and you get a chance to take a break. These are all very minor nitpicks though. There is, however, the issue of Dragon's Eye Dungeon. Yeah, fuck this particular area. In my opinion, this is one of the most poorly designed dungeons in the history of RPGs. The game goes down in flames in this part. It almost made me rage quit the first time I played it, and it almost made me rage quit this time again. And here's why. The game lets you progress all the way to the 3rd floor, but at the same time it expects you to do a series of actions in a very specific order in order to progress to the next area. If you don't do things in the order you're supposed to, the items that you need to collect and the NPCs that you need to talk to in order to progress further will not be where they are supposed to. In this area, for example, you're supposed to interact with a switch to open the door of the prison where Nero Futma, the NPC that's the turnstone to this entire area, is being held. But first, you don't even know that you have to find Nero. You don't even know this guy exists. You don't have a quest, nor any other reason to go looking for him. Second, clearing the prison is not needed to figure out the puzzle that opens the gate to the second area, so you can't descend further and miss a critical milestone that will gate you from going further at some point. Third, the switch that you're supposed to interact with to open the prison gates does not appear as an interactable item when you press the tab key, which is a problem because every other interactable item in the game up until that point, which is roughly 2/3 into the game, has gotten highlighted when you press your tab key. In this case, you need to hover over the item to detect it.
Fuck you too!
If you progress into the second level without talking to Nero first, you will not find the corpse of his friend Mandal in this area, and you need to interact with the corpse a couple of times to progress further. The game lets you kill this wyvern, for example, which drops an item that you need, but if you don't have the quest for which the item is needed, you will not see him lying on the floor. An NPC later in the game tells you that something happened in this location in the past, and as a result, that's where you're supposed to get the item you need. And if your logic is, well, I was already there and swept the place clean and didn't find anything, you're doing it wrong. Because the logic you're supposed to follow is, now that an NPC has told me about this place, the item that I need to find will have dropped from the creature that I have already killed. Same thing with a sword that's supposed to drop from this mob, same thing with this NPC. And there are also events that only happen when a certain amount of time has passed. If you read your journal entries diligently, if you explore each place to the last inch, and if you collect every item that drops, you might have an easier time navigating this place. But the fact remains that quests in these areas are a complete disaster. You should have been able to piece together what needs to be done without doing things in a linear order. Or failing that, there should have been a way for the player to figure out the order in which he or she must do things by piecing together the clues that are already out there. As a developer, you should definitely not make clues or interactable items visibly only when certain actions are triggered. For example, if some guy died somewhere, he should be lying dead in the place where he died, regardless of whether or not the player has talked to the person who's looking for him. If the player finds the dead guy's body after they've talked to the guy who's looking for him, then the quest should be to report back. But if the player runs into the corpse before they've met the guy who's looking for him, then the quest should be to find out why there's a corpse here, if he came to this place alone, and if there might be someone looking for him. And I find this baffling because Trials of the Lure Master, the free downloadable content for Heart of Winter, the expansion for the original Icewind Dale, is a masterclass on how to gate progress properly and make it feel like a mystery that you need to piece together. And even the Severed Hand chapter in this very game is properly designed. But hey, there is a component called Faster Dragon's Eye in the Enhanced Edition. Does it make this area better?
Nope, still shit.
In fact, it makes it worse. Because at least without the component, there is a quest that you can solve with alchemy or intimidation depending on your party member's skills. And this makes the character progression aspect of the game and the choices you made matter more. But the Faster Dragon's Eye component in the Enhanced Edition removes this restriction altogether, and the quest gets resolved almost automatically. Once you put this shitshow of a dungeon behind you, you reach the Magma Chamber. The first time I played Icewind Dale II, I thought this area was alright. It was a little bit tedious to move around, but the story was creative and exciting, and coming to the realization that you had walked into a time loop was pretty awesome. But this area is also designed so that quest-relevant NPCs and items only appear if you have completed the previous step in the quest line. This wasn't obvious to me during the first playthrough because the game forces you to move around by talking to the Archon, who ferries you between the different islands in the area. But this time, because I had Vera in the party, I thought I'd circumvent the whole boat thing by simply floating from island to island.
Not a great plan.
And that's when I saw the smoke machine and the mirrors. The Enhanced Edition mod also has the component Shorten the Dragon's Eye time loop questline to a single battle component. That just rolls off the tongue, by the way. As the name indicates, this whole area is shortened to one battle. And I do have to give credit to the devs for summarizing the bit of the story that takes place in this area to a single conversation. This fight gives a lot of experience, but I'm not sure it makes up for the experience you get from all the battles and quests that you have to do in the regular version. Yes, this area might get a little bit long in the tooth with all the conversations with the Archon and all the back and forth walking that you have to do, but the story, action, and location are well worth the time, especially for a first playthrough. The Dragon's Eye dungeon and the Magma Chamber constitute a pretty big chunk of the game, but not everything about them is bad. There are some pretty good combat encounters there, including a couple of interesting boss fights. So while the game becomes annoying and the pace is borderline insufferable in this area, this doesn't negate the fact that this is one of the best CRPGs that have ever been made, and I don't think any of the games that I have played this year are on par with this one in the gameplay department. The game has you traveling to abandoned temples in far-off jungles, traversing the Underdark, and even going back and forth in time to stem the tide of evil. It takes place in the isolated north region of Faerun known as Icewind Dale, so there's always the lingering feeling that you're cut off from the rest of the world, left to fend off an impossibly evil threat all by yourself, with no prospects of reinforcements coming over from other parts of the world. It features challenging combat, awesome boss battles that force you to make the most out of your party and their talents. It has enough non-combat and exploration situations for each of your party members to shine, and for it to be worthy of playing at least once again. And this makes the game feel epic, grand. The feeling of adventure in this game is too damn high! Overall, really, really good stuff that belongs in the time and the tier of the greatest RPGs ever made. Story and lore. Icewind Dale II's story didn't turn the world of RPGs on its ear when it came out, and it never became a cult classic for its story, like Planescape Torment or Mask of the Betrayer. But in truth, the game's only aspiration in regards to its story is to give you a good enough reason to go out there and do what needs to be done. And I think Icewind Dale II's story does a more than competent job with this. In fact, this is what I want for my D&D adventure. You start as a small band of adventurers who hails from Luskan and signs up to lend a hand in the defense of Targos. And of course, you eventually get mixed up into something much more serious. The story in Icewind Dale 2 happens as a consequence of the character's actions, which is the way it should be. You come across the next bit of information by going to places, talking to characters, and looking around. And these bits of information serve as breadcrumbs for you to jump into the next adventure. And there are very few things distracting you from your main objective at any given time, which helps to maintain the pace of the game and your focus on what's important. If nothing else, the story in Icewind Dale 2 is very good at making you feel like you're always jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire. The odds are always stacked against you, and the stakes get higher and higher at every turn. The story isn't perfect, of course, and there are a couple of things that'll surely have you rolling your eyes. The trope of the bad guys revealing their plans to the good guys because they are going to be dead anyways is strong in this one, and it happens several times over the course of the game. Also, the main antagonists of the story are almost cartoonish. Their arrogance is almost childish, and the arguments with which they justify their actions make them sound like an entitled modern-day Karen. I find it refreshing though that Issair and Mede are flat-out villains in this game. Not anti-heroes, not misunderstood characters who end up saving the day, no, villains. People gave them a shitty time when they were young, and now they demand compensation from the world. People who wrote stories for video games had their shit together back in the day, I swear. And I love how the Irish-sounding Archdruid of Kuldahar calls the villains out on their bullshit. The game takes place in Icewind Dale, of course, and Icewind Dale is a part of D&D lore. And creatures, characters, events, places, item descriptions, and party descriptions are consistent with the Dungeons & Dragons mythos. And so is the humor, which I think deserves a special mention in this game. Rather than undermining the gravitas of every dramatic situation with a joke, Icewind Dale 2 simply never takes itself too seriously. It's just humorous all the way through, without ever becoming cartoonish or farcical. In my book, it's up there with the original Baldur's Gate, which, in regards of the way it handles its humor, I consider to be superior to the second one. If you play Icewind Dale 2 for the first time, but you are familiar with the rest of the Infinity Engine games from the early 2000s, don't expect grand narratives like the one in Planescape Torment. Icewind Dale 2's story is straightforward and unpretentious, but it's fun and engaging all the way through, and even funny when the situation calls for it. It has lengthy voyages, unexpected turns of events that force you into perilous roads, and super high stakes. And that's all I want from my D&D CRPG. Companions, Lorewise. There is an NPC mod for Icewind Dale II out there, and it is compatible with the Enhanced Edition mod. But in this video, we're going to be talking about the companions that you can recruit in your party via the NPC core component of the Enhanced Edition. Now, these are NPCs that you have already met if you have played the game before. So the quests that you have to do for these NPCs also give you the option of recruiting them into your party if you resolve them properly and if you have a spot available in your party. You cannot recruit these guys and gals if your party is full, and you can also not manage them like your personal roster of companions to take or leave at any given time depending on who you think is better for this or that adventure. And I can see some people taking issue with this, so I'm just warning you. Now, don't expect anything like Mort, Dakon, Anoman, or Viconia. Your companions in Icewind Dale II have some things to say about the present state of things, they have thoughts about some of your actions, and depending on their alignment, they won't be up for certain courses of action. Emma Moonblade, for example, won't let you make deals with the Duergar slave traders in the Chapter 3. She will not only voice her opinions on the matter, but immediately attack them once the conversation's over. The same is true of Vera and Rake Redwaters. Vera is especially empathetic to spirits who haven't been able to move on, and she even has a few character-specific lines for some situations. I like that your party leader gets the chance to talk to them whenever they have something character-specific to say. At some point in the game, Rake starts to falter a little and tells you that he no longer feels safe. And you get the glorious option of slapping some stoicism back into the man by saying that your mission is not about his safety, but about the safety of the 10 towns, and that you're all in on it to fight the fights that other folks can't. While your companions don't have quests that stem from or lead into the main story, as it happens with Shadowheart in Baldur's Gate 3 or Jaheira in Baldur's Gate 2, they do have solid reasons to tag along for the ride. Rake joins because he wants to save Targos, Vera joins because she wants to find closure, and Emma joins because she wants to find purpose. There are many more NPCs for you to recruit, and I'm actually curious about what the dynamic would be if you recruited people with conflicting alignments. So there you have another reason to play Icewind Dale 2 yet again. I wouldn't say companions in Icewind Dale 2 Enhanced Edition make the journey more significant or thrilling than it is without them, but they definitely add a little something positive to the experience that just wasn't there before. Companions, gameplay-wise. Everything in Icewind Dale 2 is designed to give each party member his or her moment to shine. From the game's character progression system, to the various quests and exploration challenges, to the very fights themselves. If it hadn't been for my druid and her lore wilderness skill, I'd probably still be wondering about the Felwood Forest. She was also my appointed champion for those little solo missions at the monastery. I don't think anyone else in my party could have done them. My rogue was the reason I could sort out the game's trap-infested locations, and if it hadn't been for him, my party would have been a heck of a lot poorer and undergeared. I also managed to complete some quests, avoid some combat encounters, and delay some others thanks to his insane talent for bluffing. I got the best outcome from my party's encounter with these druids because my dwarf warrior managed to intimidate the ever-living hell out of them. And that's one big fucking tough fight I avoided right there, I tell you. And with all the new persuasion options that the Enhanced Edition has added to the game, things have gotten even better. And the same thing goes for combat. Your party members' skills and talents change the way you approach fights completely. And this of course includes your new recruitable companions. I had my druid solo almost the entire area outside the enemy stronghold in Chapter 1 thanks to the creeper beetle form that has been introduced with the Enhanced Edition. And with Vera's incorporeal skill, kiting and flanking became prevalent tactics for combat encounters in which I didn't even think of doing any of that during my first playthrough. And almost every choice you make at the character creation screen matters. There are race and class specific skills, feats, and even dialogue lines, and this is the best way in which a game can acknowledge the player's decisions. If I can customize my party members in any way in a video game, be it at the character creation screen or every time they level, then I want whatever choice I'm giving to matter in every aspect of the game. If the game has exploration, for example, I want areas that can only be reached if I have a party member who has a certain combat skill that I can also use for exploration purposes. I want secret doors that can only be detected by party members with the right skill. I want skill checks that are hard to pass. If the game has quests, I want some approaches and resolutions to be exclusive to a race, a class, or a skill. Hell, I want entire final outcomes to depend on your party members' skills, classes, and races. And Icewind Dale II does a pretty good job with all of this, to the point that it makes me retroactively pissed at many of the games that have come out in recent memory that fuck this up royally. It's not perfect though, there are some conversations that trigger automatically when you enter a certain area, and there is no way to choose the companion who's going to do the talking. You can of course arrange your party formation in Icewind Dale II, but this does not guarantee that the party member with the best relevant skill gets to do the talking. And this can be pretty frustrating, because I know of at least 2 conversations that would have turned out differently if I had been given the chance to choose my speaker. But even with this problem, Icewind Dale II is still one of the best games in this department. Secondary mechanics and user experience. In addition to combat, exploration, combat, questing, combat, puzzle solving, and combat, Icewind Dale II has the standard array of secondary mechanics that you'd expect from a CRPG. Trade, inventory management, resting, and spell management. I like that vendors are only interested in items that have to do with their line of work, and I also like that you can purchase items from them that are actually useful. They aren't there just for decoration as it happens with most RPGs. The Enhanced Edition mod has added a few more items which have fantastic lore-consistent descriptions and impressive stats and skills. Icewind Dale II's user experience is dated by modern standards. The Enhanced Edition mod adds a few quality of life features, but it does not fix everything. There's a quick loot feature that's been modeled after Beamdog's enhanced editions of Baldur's Gate and Icewind Dale that makes looting a bit less tedious. There is also a key binding component for automated buffing. It takes a little time to figure out, but it saves you a lot of time and manual work when it's time to buff everyone before a fight. There's an infinite stacking mod that you can install that is compatible with the Enhanced Edition mod, though the Enhanced Edition mod does not have this function per se. The Enhanced Edition also features components like always learn spells from scrolls successfully, which I love because I always save scum to this. I'm still missing many quality of life features that we have in modern day CRPGs. The inventory management interface is lacking vis-a-vis comparison windows, category tabs, item filters, and a little trade window like the one you have in Pillars of Eternity. Combat could have also greatly benefited from some of the features we enjoy nowadays. For example, I would have liked a little action timer counter above my character's heads like the one we have in Pathfinder, because timing spells and combat actions can be very tricky in this game. Also, a preview of a spell's AoE would have been nice to have. Loading screens have been massively improved with the Enhanced Edition mod, and that's a big plus on the UX side. Overall, secondary mechanics are just what you expect from a game of this genre, no more, no less. The Enhanced Edition mod greatly improves things on the UX end of things, but I still greatly miss not having many of the modern day quality of life features that I've come to enjoy. Sound effects and mix. Icewind Dale II's sound design isn't great by today's standard. The sonic landscape is robust, there is a sound for everything: combat, trading, inventory management, and even ambient sounds. A lot of spells have very cool, punchy sounds. When you walk into humid caves, you can hear the sound of water dripping and the sound of wind resonating. But there is zero verticality or occlusion, so everything sounds like it's happening right next to you. But then you have the opposite effect as well. Take for example this system of caves. So because the Duergar Slaver's stronghold is nearby, you can hear some of their conversations in the distance. But when you finally find a way into their stronghold and stand face to face with their leader, you can still hear their conversations in the distance. Also, the game has some massive sound intensity issues. Trading metal weapons with a vendor can have the same effect as listening to extreme napalm terror with earbuds full volume for an entire day. And in some areas, combat music ends abruptly while you are still fighting, and it starts all of a sudden when nothing's happening. This area is particularly bad in this respect. And you could say it's a product of its time, but the OG Fallout came out 5 years earlier, and the sound design in that game is abso-fucking-lutely killer. And it still makes you say damn and fuck yeah to this day, so there is no excuse. Also, the Enhanced Edition mod does jack shit in the sound department. Voice acting.
Matters, as your kind won't be tolerated here. You want to know? There's a last wish before you die.
Stand aside, Druid, and I'll give you a quick death.
Step away. If you attempt to take the Heartstone gem, you will pay with your lives. And for what? The right to bully those who angered you in the past.
The right? If there were any rights to be had in this pathetic land, we wouldn't be having this conversation. My right is strength. The strength nurtured by this world's hatred of half-breeds. Freaks, abominations.
I, too, am a half-breed. When people scoff at me for my mixed blood, I ignore them. I do not stoop to their level. You cannot force people to accept you, Medei. What you are doing is wrong.
What a difficult life you must have led, Isilor. Raised among the elves of Deepingdale with your loving parents. My mother killed herself when she saw what my brother and I were. Please.
It's not great. Not even when compared to its peers. How many lines from Baldur's Gate and Planescape Torment do you still remember today? Remember fondly, I mean, not because of annoying repetition. And how many do you remember from Icewind Dale II? Well, I rest my case. When the standout voice in a game is a selectable voice in the character creation interface,
Well, looks like I'm gonna have to go on a killing spree. I'm a busy man. I got places to go, monsters to kill.
you know the game does not feature great voice acting. That voice, though, has some pretty memorable lines that are also delivered with passion and charm. You have the incredibly Irish Archdruid Isilor and the crazy gnome Oswald Fiddlevender, who are pretty decent, but then you have over-the-top mustache-twirly villains like Shirinkal, Isser, and Medei, which are way too cartoony to be taken seriously. And that's a voice direction issue, because the actors aren't even that bad. Music. Epic as fuck, basically. This series has some of the most epic music in the entire genre. First game probably has the most memorable tracks, but this one is a close second. The piece that plays during the character creation screen makes you want to scream, "Saddle my horse, because today we dine in hell," or some shit like that. And every time there's a fight, which in this game is pretty fucking often, you feel like you're fighting for the survival of the entire civilized world. I know I often complain about the music being overproduced to the point that it sounds alien to what is actually happening in the game. But with music like this, I don't care if it steals the spotlight. The Enhanced Edition mod has a component that lets you loop the opening track during the entire character creation process, and you very much want to install this one. Graphics. Icewind Dale II is not on par with some of its more famous peers like Baldur's Gate 2 or Planescape Torment in the graphic department. But there is something that captivates me about the art direction in this game. I find games that take place in harsh, inhospitable, remote, icy locations endlessly fascinating. In many of these games, there is something unfathomably evil that's been asleep for 1,000 years and is now beginning to take form. Something that should have never been is slowly coming alive, and it will eventually swallow everything whole. And this is taking place in the cold far north. News travels slowly back and forth between these remote lands and the most populated parts of the continent, so this world-ending threat that's brewing right in front of the eyes of those who live in these icy lands just doesn't elicit the same urgency in the rest of the world. So it's up to the locals to face impending doom all by themselves. And Icewind Dale is just the perfect setting for this, with that big fat mountain range known as the Spine of the World, keeping it isolated from the rest of Faerun. This premise I just described may not be exactly what Icewind Dale II is about, but the game's various locations, along with clever bits of narration that you get at the beginning of every chapter, do a phenomenal job of selling you the feeling that the odds are monumentally stacked against you because these lands you seek to defend are isolated, and the prospect of reinforcements coming to your aid is little more than a pipe dream. Don't expect to see anything like the city of Baldur's Gate, the districts of the city of Am, or the island of Brynlaw from Baldur's Gate 2. These are elaborate living spaces that look busy, lived in, and big. Targos is a little helpless town by comparison. Note that the place you have to defend is a palisade and not a stronghold, and that the people in charge of its defense are militia, not an army. It's as precarious as it can be. The village of Andorra is little more than a collection of houses, and the wandering village barely counts as anything more than a camp. But these locations are exactly what they need to be. The people who live here are struggling against all manners of external threats, so they are in no position to help you or the region of Icewind Dale as a whole. But you also have locations like the Ice Temple, the Black Raven Monastery, Kaldahar, and the Yuan-Ti Temple in the jungle of Chult. These places are large, elaborate, and lore consistent. These places contrast sharply in terms of how they look with locations like the Underdark and the 4th level of Dragon's Eye Dungeon. This variety of locations make your adventure feel epic, which is what you want from your D&D games at the end of the day. Humanoid character models are okay, but the various enemy creatures that you face along the way are absolutely fantastic. Icewind Dale 2 features almost the entire cast of creatures that you can expect in a D&D game, and most of them look awesome. Special weapons and items could have looked a little bit more distinct. They all look a little bit same-ish as they are. Character portraits in this game are my very favorites, to the point that I always look for an Icewind Dale 2 portrait mod to install whenever I play games like Pillars of Eternity or Pathfinder. And kudos to the artist who made the portraits and full body arts for the new recruitable characters. They don't look the tiniest bit out of place in this game, which is quite remarkable for a game that has been around for 23 years. The game's UI deserves special mention though. I miss the days when we had UIs like this. Icewind Dale 2's UI is my favorite ever, and I'm not even kidding you. The statue with the menu, the little mosaics everywhere, the buttons that look like engraved stones, I find it endlessly immersive. I'll take this UI any day over modern day hubs like the one in Solasta. I admit it's practical and user-friendly, but it just doesn't draw me in the way these classic UIs do. So while the game's artistic vision lacks the personality of Planescape Torment or the vast detailed locations of Baldur's Gate 2, it is still a pretty solid package that nails the vibe of the setting in which the story takes place. Performance and stability. My experience with Icewind Dale 2 was positive the first time I played it a couple of years ago on a Windows 10 machine. And it's still pretty positive with the Enhanced Edition mod rocking an HD resolution on a Windows 11 machine. I did suffer a few crashes to the desktop, and these seem to happen very recurrently in very specific areas, and always during a combat encounter. The game does attempt to save right before the crash, and with one exception, I could always restore to the point in the battle where I suffered the crash. Also, casting Ghost Form on your allies can be a pain in the ass. You need to move the target character around until the spell triggers, and this can get annoying from time to time, especially if you want to cast it on all your party members individually. Also, sometimes saving a game while there were dead characters, including Vera, would bring Vera back to life but make her unselectable. So the game is not without its issues, but it's far from being unplayable. Other considerations and final thoughts.
Now is the time, now is the best time, now is the best time of your life. Life is a crime.
If you are an old-timer who had a blast with this game and played it a couple of times or 3 back in the day, and you have been low-key interested in playing it again at some point, but you have not picked it up because you have so many games in your backlog these days, I'd be willing to bet that there is a good chance that there's nothing there that's worth playing more than this game. There are 36 new feats, 110 new spells, 170 new magic items, some of which are insanely badass. 300 spells and 800 items have been revised, 10 NPCs are now recruitable, and each of them has its own lore-consistent portrait, its own dialogue lines, and in some cases, awesome skills that have a significant impact on every aspect of the game, not just combat. And to make all of this matter, some enemies now use different spells and skills, a ton of persuasion options have been introduced, and there are new ways to progress onto some areas in the game. The high-resolution component works better than the patch we had before, loading times have been dramatically improved, and there is a new quick loot system, in addition to tons of quality of life features and gameplay tweaks. You can download it for free, and if you can't find your copy of Icewind Dale or you simply can't make it work in your current machine, you can get a fresh copy from Good Old Games. And if you are a newcomer to the genre, or if this game is almost as old as you are, or if your only previous experience with the game is with games like Pillars of Eternity, Tyranny, Divinity Original Sin, Baldur's Gate 3, and other new mainstream CRPGs, and because of this you are doubtful about trying a game from the early 2000s.
And I got news for you. That means you're gay.
I can tell you, there is a very good reason why old-timers aren't as impressed with all these new games I mentioned as you guys are. And it's games like this. Give it a shot. Have a little patience with some of the game's more dated UX and the lack of some key quality of life features, and you are going to be in for one of the best D&D experiences out there. One of the best CRPGs even. Replaying Icewind Dale II in 2025 still made me say, they don't make them like they used to. And the enhanced edition brings it closer to the modern day experience without ditching any of the things that made it great in the olden days. So now is the time, friends. Now is the best time to play this game again.
And I have nothing more to say to you.
If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, thank you for watching all the way up until now. If you like what you are seeing on this channel, please consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell to avoid the usual YouTube shenanigans. Come check us out on Discord if you don't mind all the boomer talk that goes on there. I personally love it, and I wouldn't change it for anything. And share the video if you thought it was cool. Bye, everyone.
You're excused. You can go back to playing video games.